Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you very much for attending today's briefing on Easter Sunday, and really appreciate your ongoing support and interest. So today we have 18 new cases of COVID-19 to report. This comprises 14 new confirmed cases and 4 probable cases. There are no additional deaths to report, so the total number of deaths remains at 4. There are now 471 reported cases of COVID-19 where the people have recovered from their infection. This is an increase of 49 on yesterday. As you will see then, we continue to report more recovered cases than we do new cases. The new total of combined and probable cases in New Zealand is 1,330. Today there are 14 people in hospital, 1 each in Wellington, Middlemore, Wairoa in Blenheim, Dunedin and North Shore hospitals. 1 of these patients in ICU, of the total of 5 in ICU, are in a critical condition. So the 14 people in hospital, 5 in ICU, 1 of whom is in a critical condition in Dunedin. For the cases we have information on, the strongest link is with those who are contacts of existing cases, that's 47%, while 40% are linked to overseas travel. 2% are confirmed as community transmission, while 11% are still under investigation. That's a reduction from 18% a week ago. In terms of testing yesterday, it was a quieter day, I think reflecting the Easter break, and 2,421 tests were processed. The 7-day rolling average is now 3,523, and the total number of tests undertaken is 61,167, and we will of course include those updated figures on our website. Just want to comment on aged residential care as a key setting. We currently have 3 significant COVID-19 clusters in aged residential care facilities. 2 are in Christchurch and 1 in the Waikato. Now we know from international reports and of course our experience here with the 3 deaths over the last 3 days, sadly, with the deaths over the last 3 days, that this is a group that is particularly vulnerable to a poor outcome if they do get infected with this virus. We are prioritising a range of actions around this, and the DHBs and the Ministry have worked very closely with aged residential care providers and their umbrella groups right since early on in this outbreak. Very early on in the piece, I sent a message to aged residential care facilities, even before we had very many cases in New Zealand, to prevent anyone coming in, both staff and visitors, who may have any symptoms of a respiratory illness. And likewise, very soon after that, we advised them to restrict visitors. In fact, stop any visitors other than those that were for compassionate reasons. Yesterday, to supplement this, I wrote to all District Health Board Chief Executives again, asking them to systematically assess the readiness of all aged residential care providers in their area and to provide support and assistance as necessary. So the DHBs will look at each facility's plans and procedures to ensure that they are reducing any risk to residents and staff, and this will include assessing PPE stocks, how it is being used, and also to ensure that there is a ready supply of PPE for those facilities. We've produced very clear guidance and updated that yesterday on the measures that these facilities need to have in place to protect staff and residents. And most important here, of course, is that any staff who are unwell, even with any mild symptoms, or who have maybe a close contact of an existing or probable case, do not come to work. And the units must have in place very clear policies and procedures for how they treat any possible or suspected cases. So there are a number of steps underway to continue to work very closely with our aged residential care sector to ensure that we are keeping both the residents and, of course, staff safe there. In terms of the Rosewood residents who are currently at Burwood Hospital, there was a question asked yesterday about this, and in particular why they're not treated as hospital admissions. So the Rosewood residents were transferred to Burwood last week from what we would call a high-level psychogeriatric or dementia care unit. The care they are receiving is consistent with that high level of care they would have received if they had remained at Rosewood, and includes, where appropriate, end-of-life and palliative care. It's true that they are indeed now in Burwood being cared for by DHB nursing, healthcare assistants and other staff, but as would occur in the unit that they came from, the medical care is overseen by the GP even while they are in Burwood. So the care that has been provided is not medical care per se, just because they happen to be in a hospital setting. It is the care and support they were receiving when they were at Rosewood. Just an update on clusters. We continue to keep a very close eye on our 13 current clusters, and we recognise the significant public interest in the management of them. Just some clarity around one of the clusters yesterday that was named as being related to Spectrum Care, and I know there has been concern from people who receive services from Spectrum Care, and I want to reassure you that there is no need for concern there. The current cluster has 28 confirmed or probable cases, and as the Director of Public Health, Caroline McElnay, mentioned yesterday, these originated in the community and subsequently led to an infection of a person linked to Spectrum Care. However, it's not a cluster that had its origin within the Spectrum Care facility. A small number of the cases, though, are related to that, to Spectrum Care and worked there, in this case 5. All the positive results attributed to this cluster are other cases are in the community and include household and other close contacts. And I can say that the Spectrum Care staff have followed all appropriate actions, including self-isolating staff while they recover, and are working closely with the public health unit up there, Auckland Regional Public Health. And a couple of comments to finish on, and I've said this each day for the last week. It's very important people seek timely care for their healthcare needs. We have seen, and you've seen, stories of a drop-off in emergency department presentations. And I've just had the latest report from Healthline showing that many people who are calling have got quite serious symptoms when they do call. People should not be either afraid of seeking care, nor should they delay doing that. Emergency departments, doctors' surgeries, after-hours facilities all have in place very clear processes to separate out people who might have respiratory symptoms and might be being investigated or subsequently investigated for suspected Covid-19 from others who are seeking other care for other conditions. So people should not delay seeking care. They should ring Healthline, get advice. They should ring their regular GP. And likewise, anybody who has respiratory symptoms and feels they need or should be getting a test should seek advice either through Healthline or through calling their own GP, and they will be given advice about where to get swabbing done at their local community-based assessment centre. Finally, a message around Easter. As I said earlier, and as you will all know, it's Easter Sunday, so think particularly about older friends and whānau. We know Easter can be a hard time for a lot of people who may not be around friends or family at a time when we are usually very close to our friends and family. So if you can this Easter Sunday, do reach out across the generations, call or virtualise your messages to family and friends. I know many people will be doing that, and I thank you and encourage you to do that. This is a collective effort, and we will get through this if we continue to support each other.
Queensland has further segregated itself from the rest of the country, enforcing tightened border restrictions overnight. New measures require anyone entering the state to present a printed border pass, including returning residents. Queenslanders must also enter 14 days of quarantine if they've returned from a coronavirus hotspot such as Sydney.
Istanbul, Europe's largest city, is now deserted. Authorities in Turkey have imposed a 2-day lockdown in Istanbul and 30 other provinces across the country to halt the spread of the coronavirus. Restrictions are now in place in 31 provinces across Turkey, including Ankara. Existing curbs have also been scaled up. People under the age of 20 and over 65 years have been asked to strictly stay at home Additional restrictions have been put in place as the total number of cases crossed the 47,000 mark, while over 1,000 people have lost their lives in the country. Turkey has also halted all international flights, restricted domestic travel, closed schools, bars and cafes. Mass prayers in mosques have also been suspended. People, however, have still been going to work to sustain economic activities. Turkish authorities called on the people to maintain social distancing very strictly. However, soon after the news of the move emerged, many people left their homes to buy food in the country's commercial hub, Istanbul, which houses 16 million people. People could be seen standing in long queues outside supermarkets to purchase essentials. Bakeries, pharmacies and health facilities have been exempt from the ban to enable people to meet their essential needs.
UK Prime Minister's half-brother has labelled the medical treatment Boris Johnson received before his hospital admission a shambles. In a statement, Max Johnson says a doctor didn't physically examine his brother for the duration of his quarantine. The Prime Minister announced he'd tested positive to the virus on March 27 before being admitted to intensive care at St Thomas Hospital in London 10 days later. He has left the ICU but remains in hospital.
Social distancing is just one of many challenges in Alexandra.
We're trying our best to stay indoors, but our biggest problem is we're overcrowded. There are about 6 or 7 people in one room.
We need sanitizers, we need food, we need soap, we need almost everything.
The shantytown is one of Johannesburg's poorest. Authorities have been doing what they can to sanitise the neighbourhood and enforce law and order, but they are not reaching everyone. So community leaders like Linda Twyler are doing what they can to fill the gaps. He fears the coronavirus outbreak will be worse than the AIDS epidemic.
During those years, we were able to control the AIDS epidemic, but now this one seems to be uncontrollable.
I think his fear is not unfounded. But I think part of what is really difficult about coronavirus is that there is this extreme panic and uncertainty about, how this will play out.
Like other parts of the world, the lockdown in South Africa was imposed suddenly, forcing already struggling workers to survive without an income. Essential services like grocery stores are open, but those living in shanty towns often miss out. Experts say there must be a concerted effort to help those most in need.
I really worry about what families are doing at the moment to cope and make ends meet.
And this is what we have to go through every single day, and the wheelchair cannot pass here.
Making the fight for survival even harder. James Oaten, ABC News.
And San Francisco has entered into its 4th week of the lockdown, and there's been a major outbreak of the deadly virus at the city's largest shelter for the homeless. At least about 70 people who are staying at the centre have now tested positive. On Wednesday, the shelter had recorded 5 cases, 3 residents and 2 staff members. In just 3 days, the infection spread to nearly about 63 other homeless people residing at the shelter. This outbreak is the largest reported at a single shelter in the United States, and such cases have also been detected in a dozen homeless shelters in New York and also in Los Angeles. And this could, of course, prove to be a huge problem for the United States, which is the worst affected country in the world. Now, the multi-service center, the shelter where the outbreak has been identified, usually houses over 350 people. Keeping the social distancing norms in mind, the number of residents at the shelter was reduced to less than 150. Now, all of these homeless residents were tested, and all of the current residents have tested positive for the virus. Now, the homeless are particularly vulnerable to the virus, as most of them are prone to respiratory illnesses. The San Francisco's city mayor, London Breed, has said that those who test negative will be moved to hotel rooms, and those who test positive will remain at the shelter, where more medical staff have been deployed. San Francisco has over 8,000 homeless people, and authorities are concerned that they may not be able to find enough hotel rooms to house all the homeless people who are currently living in tents or in shelters.
And we begin tonight with a disturbing milestone in this coronavirus pandemic. The death toll in this country surpassing 20,000. That includes more than 2,000 lives lost in the last 24 hours. America's deadliest day yet. 783 deaths in New York alone. This latest surge pushing the U.S. total beyond hard-hit Italy after already overtaking Spain, now the deadliest nation in confirmed COVID-19 fatalities. We have reported on the economic toll. Look at this. Cars lined up at food banks across the country. Nearly 17 million Americans suddenly out of work as the first Americans are receiving stimulus checks from the Treasury Department. Concerns tonight over emerging hot zones, cases spiking in Maryland and in Texas, the race to set up field hospitals. There are new reports of trouble with testing in California, thousands still waiting to learn whether they are positive. And the questions on so many minds tonight, when will America reopen? President Trump calling that the biggest decision of his life. Leaders across the country urging Americans to keep their guard up. We will work through it all, and we begin with ABC's Trevor Ault at the Javits Center here in New York City.
Tonight, a grim milestone for the United States. More than 20,000 Americans have died from COVID-19, this country now leading the world in reported deaths from the virus. Here in the epicenter of the pandemic in the U.S., officials hope New York has seen the worst.
The good news is the curve of the increase is continuing to flatten.
So far, the virus has claimed the lives of more than 8,600 New Yorkers, including 783 more deaths in the past 24 hours. But there are signs the state may have reached its apex.
That is not an all-time high, and you can see that the number is somewhat stabilizing, but it is stabilizing at an horrific rate.
These New York City paramedics on the front lines warn the fight is far from over.
Says she's chilled and shaking.
In just one shift, 3 people pronounced dead before 9 a.m.
We're needed out there. There's a job to do. It's not going away until we're done with this mission. And this is a war we're fighting.
Cautious optimism from officials leading to confusion for New York City parents over whether their children will head back to school. Mayor Bill de Blasio declaring this morning,
I announced today that the New York City public schools will remain closed for the remainder of this school year.
But an hour later, Governor Cuomo undercutting that announcement.
There has been no decision. That's the mayor's opinion.
The mayor does have the authority to close school through the end of the academic year, but this back and forth between him and the governor is really only adding to the anxiety for families in the largest school district in the country, 1.1 million students.
The rate of hospitalization in New York is down, but some ICUs still pushed to the brink. All week, ABC News received guided access at Maimonides Medical Center in Brooklyn. Dr. Michael Seaman, an anesthesiologist, now reassigned to the front lines.
We've taken our post-anesthesia care unit, where patients usually come out of the operating room after procedures, and we've repurposed it and turned it into an ICU because we're so short.
To help with that incredible burden on hospitals, the massive just converted Javits Center and that Navy hospital ship, the Comfort, have a combined 3,500 beds, but according to the Department of Defense, 90% of them are empty. The virus also taking a devastating toll on our nation's nursing homes. The Wall Street Journal reporting cases at 2,100 senior facilities nationwide. An outbreak of dozens of cases at this Augusta nursing home, and near Detroit reports of more than 20 patients dying from the virus at 2 facilities.
Our most vulnerable citizens are dying in a helpless manner.
Michigan's governor expanding her executive order to ban travel between homes. And in Los Angeles, masks are now required for anyone in public as the stay-at-home order has been extended to May 15th.
Everyone should do their part, and nobody is immune to this.
And across the country, almost 30,000 people have recovered, including Minnesota woman Vera Mueller, diagnosed 2 days after her 104th birthday. She since fought her way back to health. And this scene from Providence Little Company of Mary in California. Doctors and nurses cheering for their first COVID-19 patient. At one point, they didn't think he'd make it. Now he's heading home.
Those are great survivor stories. And Trevor Ault joins us now from the Javits Center, now converted into a hospital. And Trevor, we've reported that facility and the hospital ship the Comfort were supposed to relieve pressure on the hospitals here in New York. But so far, they've been used far below their capacity.
Oh, that's right, Tom, and that's a problem the military officials really haven't been able to figure out yet. Both of these facilities have had low patient numbers when they were treating people who didn't have the virus, and low numbers now while they're treating people who do have it. It's possible because COVID-19 patients can deteriorate or even die very quickly. Other hospitals might just be taking in every person they see, even if they're full, because taking the time to send them here or to the Comfort might prove to be too much of a risk. Tom?
Trevor Ault reporting live for us tonight. Trevor, thank you.
Now, even as the Indian government is considering an extension of the lockdown, multiple states across India have already announced their decision to not repeal the containment measures. Maharashtra, Karnataka, Telangana, West Bengal, Odisha and Punjab have made the call to extend the lockdown by a period of at least 2 more weeks. That is until the end of this month. Now, Andhra Pradesh wants the lockdown to be extended only in the identified red zones. Both Delhi and Gujarat are, however, in favour of a nationwide extension until the end of April. Interestingly, Chhattisgarh is calling for a limited repeal so as to restart some economic activities. The reports also indicate that, broadly speaking, there is consensus pretty much amongst all chief ministers for a 2-week extension. The final decision now lies with the Indian Prime Minister. Narendra Modi is expected to make an announcement sometime soon. So let's now get you the latest coronavirus numbers that have been reported from India in the last 24 hours. It's being stated that 909 new cases have been reported across India, with 34 fatalities linked to Covid-19. So the total tally of infections has now crossed the 8,300 mark with 273 fatalities, which means that the fatality rate in India at this point of time is about 3.2%. The 715 patients have recovered from the infection so far.
Russia has stepped up measures to curb the coronavirus pandemic within its borders. The country confirmed 1,667 new coronavirus cases and a record single-day surge in infections on Friday. With this, Russia's official number of cases rose to more than 13,500. The death toll surpasses 100. Moscow has been the hardest hit Russian city and has implemented strict lockdown measures in an effort to slow the spread of the virus. The mayor of Russia's capital said the acceleration of coronavirus infections calls for tighter restrictions as hospitals in Moscow are approaching their limit. The mayor introduced a system that requires people to receive permission to travel after voluntary restrictions failed to keep people off the streets.
Очень много вопросов о пропусках. Пропускной режим передвижения по городу – это неизбежное дополнительное ограничение и неудобство. Но когда речь идет о здоровье и жизни огромного количества людей, выбора нет. Особенно, когда мы видим, что, к сожалению, не все соблюдают установленные ограничения. На следующей неделе будем постепенно вводить пропускной режим.
The new system comes after officials warned that Moscow's health infrastructure was increasingly stressed by the continued spread of coronavirus, despite a stay-at-home order issued on the 30th of March. Currently, Russia is under partial lockdown. As per the report, residents in Moscow have been told to stay at home unless they need to make essential trips to buy food or access urgent medical care.
Well, just how dangerous is the coronavirus? We know it kills, but so do many other things. The question is, what is the actual mortality rate? Dr. Jay Bhattacharya is a professor of medicine at Stanford University. He's a research associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research and a senior fellow at both the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research and the Stanford Freeman Spogli Institute. On March 24th, he wrote a controversial article in the Wall Street Journal questioning the premise that coronavirus would kill millions without shelter-in-place orders and quarantines. In the article, he suggested that there's little evidence to confirm the premise, and projections of the death toll could plausibly be orders of magnitude too high. Professor Bhattacharya joins us exclusively here on Outsiders. Professor, how are you?
Doing well. Thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for coming on the show. Now, just can you tell us precisely why you upset so many people? They told you to get with the program. They attacked you. What have you done that's so wrong, Jay?
I don't pay very much attention to the press. I've been focused on trying to understand how many people actually have the COVID virus infection. And so the last few weeks since that op-ed, I've been organizing or helping to organize studies to figure out how many people have antibodies to the virus in them inside their bodies as evidence that that they've had infection. Most people that get the virus actually are going to have very few symptoms. It's obviously a very deadly virus that some people leads to hospitalizations and deaths. We've seen that in pictures all over the world. The question is, how large a fraction of the population is that? Is the death rate 0.1%? Is the death rate 3% like the World Health Organization originally said? It's a big difference, 1 in 1,000 versus 3 in 100. I'd much rather avoid a 3 in 100 chance of dying than a 1 in 1,000 chance of dying. So the question, that's the question I've been focused on, is developing evidence to understand how many people actually have been infected as a result of the virus.
And how are you finding that out? You said a couple of weeks ago that you were starting on research that hopefully by the end of April you would have answers to these questions. And without the number, the key denominator you spoke about that determines just what the mortality rate is, our policy directions are all over the place. How close are you to getting that denominator, that answer? And explain why it's important.
Sure. That's a really good way to put it. So I have been working on a community survey of Santa Clara County in California. Also, I've been working with a group that's working in Los Angeles County, and we're going to have nationwide numbers also, I think, starting next week, nationwide in the United States, of course, where we have done basically a random sample from the population, and they've come and they've given their blood so that we can analyze it and see, do they have evidence of these antibodies? From these studies, we're going to know, I think, I'll be able to say within next week how widespread the virus actually has been. Why is this important? Well, for two reasons. One is, suppose that what I anticipate finding is what we find, which is that the disease is probably much more widespread than we think. That is, many, many more people have had it with relatively limited symptoms. Well, that means that the death rate for the virus is orders of magnitude lower than we think, nowhere near the 3% that the World Health Organization originally said. Much lower, maybe more in line with the death rate from the flu. Now, on the other hand, it is important to realize that there's no vaccine for this virus, so it's still something to worry about. And actually, as you said in your intro, a very reasonable policy would be to sort of start carefully lifting the restrictions. But how can you make that decision without data? What I'm hoping is to provide a way to get that data, to make those decisions in a wise way. By understanding how extensive the infection is, the models that people have been using to forecast whether hospital systems will get overloaded, well, they don't actually have good data to understand that, because you don't know how many people actually have it. So this is important to know, because we'll finally be able to make good data-driven decisions about when it's safe to lift off the economic caps that we put in place, how to protect vulnerable populations from the virus, because that's certainly still going to be a concern, especially as we start lifting up the caps. I think we have been flying in the dark with policy because we don't have this information about the extensive spread of the virus. Once we do, I think we'll start to make much better policy.
Rita.
Well, just on the herd immunity, or just the extent of the population who've encountered this virus, there's some research, I don't know if you've come across it yet, just come out of South Korea, where they say they've got 91 patients who were thought to have been cleared of coronavirus who are testing positive again. Now, they're not sure whether these people have been reinfected or it's just the virus has reactivated within them. They're not sure of that yet, but are we even certain that once you've had this virus, you've built up immunity to it, or could you get it again and again?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot we don't know about this virus right now, and in particular about the immunity, whether being infected provides long-lasting immunity. That's something that's actively under investigation by a lot of people. And so I don't think we know yet that answer. What we do know, though, is that that antibodies develop to the virus when you're infected with it, and that those antibodies are evidence that you've had the infection. So if you want to understand the mortality rate, you need to know that. So the question of can you get immunity from an infection to the virus, that's still open. The question of do you develop antibodies in response to being infected, that was pretty well understood. You certainly do. They probably provide some immunity, maybe not complete immunity. So whether you can use the antibody presence to actually say, okay, it's safe to go back to work or not, that's not clear yet to me. But what is clear to me is that you can use it to really understand the mortality rate. Is it really more like 1 in 1,000, or is it more like 3%? That you can certainly tell from the kind of studies I'm proposing. I think, actually, I want to address a point that I think is really kind of sensitive but worth thinking about. We basically say with things like the flu, which have mortality rates something like 1 in 1,000, that we're in some sense comfortable with it. People are going to get the flu, and some people are unfortunately going to die from it. And we keep our economy open because suppressing the economy causes deaths of despair, deaths. Poorer countries are just unhealthier countries. All kinds of economic damage is not just economic damage; it's health damage that comes from being poorer. So the kind of trade-off we make is, all right, we're not going to suppress our economy entirely because of a 1 in 1,000 risk from death from the flu. I think those are the kind of sort of adult decisions we have to make. What risks are we willing to take? And there are risks on both sides of this policy divide. If you suppress the economy, you're going to have to cope with the fact that a lot of people are going to be out of work. There's going to be deaths from despair, as we said. Around the world, poor countries can very ill afford to have even small hits to the GDP. Literally billions of people's lives are at stake from a global economy that's not functioning well. So we have to sort of make adult decisions about what risks we're going to take or willing to take from infectious disease outbreaks versus the harm to health and livelihoods from economic deaths. So I think the evidence out of South Korea is interesting because I think it's going to put squarely in front of us those kinds of very difficult choices.
James. But I'm just interested also, I want to ask about some of the models that we've seen. There's always been this sort of fight between a couple of models we had in Britain, for example. The extreme models wind up in the political context being what politicians always go for because they use that to justify all of these restrictions that they're putting on them. But time and again, we're seeing that actually the models become far more conservative once actual numbers start to come in. Is this your general sense of it? And once we start to get a sense that actually it might be less deadly than it is, and there will be a political pushback that says we have to take into account these other lives that we are going to lose and destroy versus these ones that we're saving in the here and now, who, when they're lost, make headlines.
Yeah, no, I think that's really right. I mean, I was researching the H1N1 flu a while back, and the evidence there was very similar. The early reports were very, very high mortality rates, and as more scientific evidence came in, the mortality rate numbers came down as people learned about really the true extent of the infection throughout the population. I went from originally it was 1% down to 0.01%. I think something similar will happen here. I mean, I have a lot of sympathy for political leaders and public health officials that have to make very difficult choices on almost no information, no good information, and they're seeing evidence of people dying in front of them. It's hard to make those choices. But I think we're very, very soon to be in a position where we don't have to do that anymore. We're going to have this information that we need to populate the models with real numbers based on actual scientific studies as opposed to guesses, and then we can start to make good choices as a result of that. I think we're headed in that direction, and my hope is that very soon we'll know these numbers around the world. I've been very encouraged to see that lots of other places are doing the kind of serology testing that I've been working on in the United States. I think we'll very soon start to have a much better grasp on what this epidemic really is about and how best to cope with it from a policy point of view.
The world under lockdown. In normally bustling New Delhi, birds sing out in deserted streets. There is no one at Greece's tourist hotspots. Only prayer echoes across Riyadh. People are staying home, but if we look up, nearly 8 billion of us can share in something else. A supermoon is above us, rising on Tuesday evening. It is expected to be the brightest and biggest of the year. In China, restrictions have eased, and a reduction in pollution means life is looking up. The event happens roughly every 14 months. Some astronomers expect the moon to come closer to Earth than at any time since 1948.
Tonight on 6 on Your Side at 10, a rare and powerful earthquake rocks the state from Twin Falls to Moscow and sends Treasure Valley residents scrambling for cover.
From cracks in the street to other signs of damage, Boise, Idaho got lucky from a big quake centered just about 75 miles to the north and east.
Oh my God. I'm not gonna see if Megan felt that one. I just worry about the beams.
But it wasn't just one quake. The 6.5 in blue has also been followed by aftershocks, dozens of them.
Related or just a coincidence? After a magnitude 6.5 earthquake yesterday in Idaho, we asked a local seismologist if it is connected to the quake here in Utah 2 weeks ago.
Floors, walls, our chandelier is shaking.
Tobin says the west coast is being pulled north and compressed. It creates a rotational effect east to that part of Idaho, which instead of being squeezed is actually being stretched and expanded.
So far this year, we tragically lost Kobe Bryant. Sports has been canceled. The coronavirus has us isolated inside our own homes, and now an earthquake? Can we just start 2020 over? And I know I'm not the only one who feels this way.
Some years are like this and some years are calm, and you never know.
This is Mecca after the Saudi authorities imposed a full lockdown. Islam's holiest site is always packed with pilgrims throughout the year. But these are extraordinary times.
These farmers in eastern Kenya's Kitui County are running out of time. They were invaded by millions of desert locusts that used their farms to breed. Now their hoppers are about to mature, and if the farmers don't kill them all before they develop wings, then this second generation of locusts that have already devoured tens of thousands of hectares of vegetation across East Africa will cause even more devastation.
Although locust invasions are nothing new, it's been decades since swarms of this size were seen in many affected countries.
Nastua tu kwa sababu hatujaona manini kama hii. Na tena ukiingia kwa miti kama hii anamaliza nyasi mpaka hata unastuka kitu kiendelea kwenda mbele atamaliza nini nyasi zaidi.
The swarms in Kenya will be moving north. In the region, countries such as Ethiopia, Somalia, South Sudan, Eritrea and Djibouti will be hit hard as the locusts head toward the Arabian Peninsula. Some farmers are concerned that with the onset of coronavirus, many governments will divert resources meant to deal with the locusts.
A locust swarm can cover hundreds of square kilometers. It's not uncommon for a swarm to be as big as the size of a major city. And 1 square kilometer can contain at least 40 million locust adults. What's more, in just a single day, these hungry insects can eat the same amount of food that 35,000 human beings would be capable of. The current desert locust outbreak took the countries in the Horn of Africa by surprise. Somalia hasn't seen this amount of locusts in the last 25 years. For Kenya, it's the worst outbreak in 70 years. The scale of the locust invasion has overwhelmed these countries.
We start with breaking news. A 5.3 magnitude earthquake just hit an area that's just north of Yosemite. Right now, there are no reports of any injuries or damage. Again, a 5.3 magnitude earthquake this morning in Central California. We'll continue to follow this story throughout the morning.
A 5.3 magnitude earthquake hit near the California-Nevada border this morning at 7:36. The epicenter was 31 miles northeast of
More than a week after the Magna earthquake, aftershocks are still shaking the Salt Lake Valley. Just this morning, there was a pair of magnitude 3 aftershocks. They're the latest in a string of hundreds.
And Bob, all that shaking is causing some anxiety for folks.
And it shows that while the rate of quakes is slowing, we'll likely continue to have aftershocks for a while.
The 3.3 magnitude around 10:15 this morning was among over 30 aftershocks just Thursday.
The floor jumped and lifted for a few seconds.
There have been more than 560 aftershocks in just the last 8 days. Most are too weak to be felt, but the 32 that reached a magnitude 3 or higher,
definitely very nerve-wracking.
Thursday's quakes moved east and closer to the surface, according to Keith Coper, who says it's common to feel on edge. Heightened anxiety can also cause so-called phantom quakes, when you feel shaking without an actual earthquake. Coper says it's all to be expected.
That's creepy, right?
Says it's different from what happened here in Utah on March 18th.
That was a magnitude 5.7, and that was what we call a normal earthquake, and that's where you have the earth being stretched apart.
Who felt the shaking from that earthquake all the way down here in Utah are now wondering if the Idaho earthquake is somehow related to the earthquake we had 2 weeks ago in Magna. 2 earthquakes, just a matter of weeks apart. And he says the 2 earthquakes are not related. He says it's sort of a coincidence.
Make sure you look up tonight because it's expected to be the biggest and brightest supermoon of the year. The supermoon happens when there's a full moon that's closer to the Earth than it's normally.
It's one of the world's largest coral systems, made up of nearly 3,000 separate reefs and 900 islands. The Great Barrier Reef attracts huge numbers of tourists every year, but this underwater treasure is at risk of disappearing due to coral bleaching. Over the past 2 weeks, James Cook University has surveyed more than 1,000 reefs. It found they were severely bleached in all 3 regions of the system and says it's more widespread than ever before. This is the 3rd time it's happened in the past 5 years.
If this continues and we're seeing these mass bleaching events every few years, there just will not be the opportunity for the corals to recover in between these major disturbances.
It really is unprecedented, and when we think about what the Great Barrier Reef gives Australia, it's its cultural heritage, it's iconic, and the tourism industry, all of these facets we will lose instantly if we have another bleaching event of these magnitudes.
The reef is highly vulnerable, not only to warming temperatures, but also pollution and coastal development.
Of course, severe drought is intensifying bushfires.
Rain, rain, and more rain. After an unusually dry January and February, Southern California has been pummeled by a series of spring storms in late March and April.
An unprecedented response to a virus unknown to the world just a few months ago. Now on nearly every continent, country and street.
It's been called the crossroads of the world.
but these days, no one is going anywhere. New York, the center of American culture and commerce.
Even the famously busy Grand Central Station is eerily quiet. During normal times, 750,000 people would pass through here each day.
Italy ordered a national lockdown. 2 days later, the World Health Organization made a rare declaration.
We're deeply concerned both by the alarming levels of spread and severity and by the alarming levels of inaction.
Most governments have decided, for now at least, drastic measures are necessary to save lives, no matter the cost. Many have implemented unprecedented lockdowns to slow the spread of the virus so healthcare systems aren't overwhelmed. Scientists say we're in uncharted territory.
Over the span of 2,000 years, we have been given a collection of 66 books written by 40 people in various cultures, time periods, and languages. Today we call this collection the Holy Bible. Upon investigation, we find that these 66 books combine to form a message to humanity from a being outside of space and time by writing history before it happens. The Bible predicted the advent of the New Age movement and the New World Order thousands of years ago. It also tells us of a man who will rule this world empire and what his true intentions will be. All of this has been in the works for thousands of years, and it all hinges on Satan's ability to deceive mankind. The Apostle Paul in the 1st century AD wrote several letters to early churches, which are now called the epistles. The far application of these letters are a clear warning for us today. It is a warning of impending deception that will influence the whole world. Paul warns us of this deception in Ephesians 5, where he states, "Let no one deceive you with empty words." Then in his first letter to the Corinthians, he again tells us, "Do not deceive yourselves. If any one of you thinks he is wise by the standards of this age, he should become a fool so that he may become wise." In a letter to the Romans, he describes those who willingly live in lies when he writes, "Their throats are open graves, their tongues practice deceit, the poison of vipers is on their lips. For such people are not serving our Lord Christ, but their own appetites. By smooth talk and flattery, they deceive the minds of naive people." In a letter to Timothy, Paul clearly describes the world we see today when he writes, "The Spirit clearly says that in later times some will abandon the faith and follow deceiving spirits in things taught by demons." In the second letter to the Thessalonians, Paul describes the New World Order and the Antichrist when he wrote, "Don't let anyone deceive you in any way, for that day will not come until the rebellion occurs and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the man doomed to destruction. Don't you remember that when I was with you, I used to tell you these things, and now you know what is holding him back, so that he may be revealed at the proper time. For the secret power of lawlessness is already at work, but the one who now holds it back will continue to do so till he is taken out of the way. And then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord Jesus will overthrow with the breath of his mouth and destroy by the splendor of his coming. The coming of the lawless one will be in accordance with the work of Satan, displayed in all kinds of counterfeit miracles, signs, and wonders, and in every sort of evil that deceives those who are perishing. They are perishing because they refused to love the truth and so be saved. For this reason, God sends them a powerful delusion so that they will believe the lie, and so that all will be condemned who have not believed the truth but have delighted in wickedness." The Apostle John, while in prison on the island of Patmos, had a vision of the end times and the deceiving entities that will walk the earth, stating, "And the great dragon was cast out, the ancient serpent who is called Devil and Satan, he who deceives the whole habitable world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. He deceives my own people who dwell on the earth because of the signs he was granted to do in front of the beast, saying to those who dwell on the earth that they should make an image of the beast who had the sword wound and lived." Jesus Christ himself gave his discourse of the end times when he stated clear warnings of the signs of the end. "Watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, claiming I am the Christ, and will deceive many. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nations will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of the birth pains. Then you will be handed over to be persecuted and put to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of me. At that time, many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other. And many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. For then there will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. At that time, if anyone says to you, "Look, here is the Christ," or "There he is," do not believe it, for false Christs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and miracles to deceive even the elect, if that were possible. See, I have told you ahead of time. Jesus Christ died for the sins of all mankind. That means he died for the New Agers, the Freemasons, those in the Illuminati, the world elite, the Luciferians, the Satanists, and even me and you. God himself, taking on humanity, has given mankind a free gift of salvation and of true spiritual freedom. Now we all have a choice. We can live in darkness, allowing evil to enter our lives and unwillingly support the work of Satan and his fallen angels. Or we can let Jesus into our hearts and be spiritually saved forever. There are no prerequisites, rituals, or tests for accepting this gift of salvation. All one needs to do is ask honestly for Jesus to come into their heart. Remember these truths. God loves you, God cares about you, God wants nothing more than to know you personally and save you. Sin separates people from each other and God. Jesus died for your sins and rose again. You can receive Jesus now and know God's love right at this very moment. I pray for you all and hope the truth will indeed set you free. Thanks for your time. I think in conclusion, I'd like to appeal to those people that have been researching this for any length of time, specifically long periods of time, maybe even years. To you, I don't think this is going to require a lot of convincing. I think that subconsciously you know that a lot of what was said here is true. I think that you have seen over the years a lot of conclusions about what the New World Order is and what their motives are. And I know that you know that it doesn't really explain all the loose ends and tie them all up. I think that you know, after kicking down so many doors in New World Order research and seeing those that truly expose the New World Order, this theme, that it is in fact theistic Satanism behind those doors. I know that you've seen that. You've seen that they are high-level occultists that really run the show and that are in the shadows. And that even those front men at the very tops are only front men, and that the real movers and shakers are those that hold very dedicated beliefs about the worship of Satan. So we even have this idea that somehow doesn't apply. We have a phrase that we'll say, which is, it doesn't matter what you believe, the fact is that they believe it, which sort of means, yeah, sure, they're all occultists at the top, but it doesn't really matter. They're just sort of deluded. And I think that's a very dangerous position, because if you actually are saying there that it doesn't matter, it's not actually true, there isn't really a Satan and there isn't really a power that they're serving, then we should just, again, think that this scenario has something to do with whatever we make it out to be. It certainly can't be about a cosmic war of good and evil, because we've already decided that that can't be true. Yet at the same time, we're pointing out that these people are knowingly worshiping Satan, which is something that the Bible has said has gone on from the very beginning. The kings and queens of all the old systems were always sacrificing their children to various gods and Moloch and these types of things. And they are still doing it today and are gaining power from it. The problem with believing that is it makes too much sense that all of this energy with the New Age preachers and teachers and truth movement icons and gurus are doing mainly two things. One, they're promoting this idea of a New Age coming in which you're going to be God and you're going to be evolved and all the obvious stuff that's preparing you for the system of the Antichrist. And the other part of that is they're telling you that Jesus isn't good, you shouldn't pay attention to him, or at least they're trying to misdirect you, tell him he's just this other guy, he's not really who the Bible says he is, or they're trying to discredit the Bible. There's only two things that these guys are doing. They're telling you and preparing you for the new system that you're going to think is your utopia. And then they're telling you to not pay any attention to the man that the Bible said would crush the one that these people at the top are worshiping. Does anybody see a problem with that? That we have been told what to think about the Bible and Jesus Christ by Satanists. The problem here is that what we've been told and what we've been prepared to believe is all what we would choose to believe. It's all very seductive. They're telling you that you can be as God. They're telling you that there is no real accountability for your actions, that anything that you want to do is good and normal and should be praised. These ideas are very difficult to resist. Truth really is irrelevant at that point because we will fight to defend those ideas regardless of if they are true or not. And that's why there's so many conflicting quote-unquote truths in the New Age and in the truth movement. You know, that's why the first thing that you're taught in the truth movement is that truth is relative. Oh, it doesn't matter, your truth is just as good as my truth. And we'll fight to defend this completely erroneous idea. I've got news for you. It doesn't matter what way the universe operates. The fact is that it does operate one particular way, cause and effect, in a closed system. We are dealing with absolute truth. Maybe yours, maybe mine, but it is absolute, and it is one. We should be concerned about looking for the truth. And I suggest to all you researchers out there that you already have enough evidence to know that Jesus Christ is who he says that he is. You owe it to yourself to figure out more about him the way the Bible says that he is. Not the way that the New World Order says that he is, but the way the Bible says that he is. The Bible has been continually discredited. You're told not to listen to it. You're told not to pay attention to it. They do everything under the sun to keep you from it. They always have. So why don't you just realize that and take the time and figure out who is Jesus according to the Bible?